Hi everyone, this is Miss Huval. Today's video will help you with day 3 of DGP, which is finding independent and dependent clauses. So today's video will show you how to tell the difference between an independent and a dependent clause and divide the sentence up into independent and dependent clauses. So once again, this is for day 3, Wednesday of DGP. So let's get started by learning the two different types of clauses. And the wonderful thing is that there are only two types of clauses, independent and dependent. And surely you've been learning about independent and dependent clauses throughout your academic career. And no doubt you've learned the rule that independent clauses can stand alone and that dependent clauses can't stand alone. All right, this is absolutely true, but I would like to take you one step deeper and teach you why it is that independent clauses can stand alone and dependent clauses can't. All right, so one thing that independent and dependent clauses have in common is that they both have a simple subject and a simple predicate. They have to have, both of them, a simple subject and a simple predicate. You can see over here under the dependent clause, also you have to have a simple subject and a simple predicate. All right, so every clause in your sentence is going to have a simple subject and a simple predicate. The difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause is that a dependent clause has a subordinator. That is, it has a word at the beginning of it which has the power to make it dependent, to subordinate it to the independent clause. Words that fall under this category of subordinator are words like subordinating conjunctions, relative pronouns, and noun clause identifiers. All right, so as you're working through your DGP, on Monday, you would have marked all the subordinators. On Tuesday, you would have marked the subjects and the predicates. So that on Wednesday, when it comes time to actually divide the sentence up into independent and dependent clauses, you already have all the information you need marked on your sentence. So to recap, an independent clause always follows this pattern. Independent clause equals simple subject plus simple predicate. A dependent clause has this pattern: subordinator, subject, predicate. Now, might there be other words besides the subject and the predicate in an independent clause and besides the subordinator, the subject, and the predicate in a dependent clause? Yes. There could be prepositional phrases, adjectives, adverbs, all manner of other things can be in these clauses. But the things that define them as either an independent or a dependent clause are the subject and the predicate and the subordinator. Okay, let's keep going with this. All right, so how are you going to know how many clauses are in the sentence? When you look at a sentence, how do you know how many clauses you're trying to divide it up into? Well, the number of subject-predicate pairs equals the number of clauses. And if you think about it, that makes sense, since every dependent clause has to have a subject and a predicate, and every independent clause has to have a subject and a predicate. The number of subject-predicate pairs equals the number of clauses. So in other words, if you found 3 subject-predicate pairs in a sentence, then there are also 3 clauses in the sentence. All you have to do is figure out if these clauses are independent or dependent and where they start and stop. All right, so how do I tell where a clause begins and ends? Now, it's important to know that the whole sentence, every single word in the sentence, is going to be in a clause. So it's a matter of dividing the sentence into the clauses that exist there in the sentence. Now, dependent clauses usually begin with the subordinator, then have a subject and a predicate. For example, when Mrs. Lipton died. That has a subordinator, a subject, and a predicate. Therefore, it's a dependent clause. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to see whether it could stand alone. It has those three elements, so it's a dependent clause. However, a lot of times the dependent clause is going to have many more words than just these three, right? That's okay. The words which tell about or modify the parts of the clause are included in the clause. Check this one out. When the elderly Mrs. Lipton died alone in her bed. Okay, we still have the same three elements. The subordinator when, the subject Mrs. Lipton, and the predicate died. Okay, but we've got a whole bunch of other stuff mixed in. Does that change the fact that this is a dependent clause? No, but we can tell that the and elderly tell about Miss Lipton. Alone tells how she died. In her bed tells how she died. So all of these things modify or tell about the essential elements of this dependent clause. They either tell about the subject or they tell about the predicate. So all of these things would be in the dependent clause. Same thing happens with the independent clause, except they don't have a subordinator. Independent clauses do not have subordinators. They'll likely begin with the subject and then have a simple predicate. So check this one out. Dogs bark. All right, that is an independent clause because it has the elements that an independent clause requires, a subject and a predicate. However, most often, your clauses are going to have more than just the subject and the predicate. They're going to have adjectives, adverbs, maybe they're going to have prepositional phrases and other things. All right, so here we've still got dogs and we've still got bark. We've got the annoying dogs next door bark incessantly throughout the night. All of these extra words also are in the independent clause because they tell about the essential elements of the dependent clause, which is dogs and bark. So the and annoying tell about dogs. Next door tell about dogs. Incessantly tells how they bark. And throughout the night is a prepositional phrase that tells when they bark. So every one of these other words directly pertain to the essential element of the subject or the predicate. They tell about them, they modify them, and so they must be included in the independent clause. All right, the next thing we do on Wednesday is a sentence purpose and a sentence type. Now, you've been learning about purposes your whole life. Maybe you haven't talked about it in a while, but a declarative sentence makes a statement. An imperative sentence is a command. An exclamatory sentence is an exclamation. And an interrogative sentence is a question. All right, so it's pretty easy to figure that part out. Now, sentence type is also extremely important for you to understand the types of sentences that you encounter, the types of sentences that you write. So a simple sentence has one independent clause. A compound sentence has two or more independent clauses. A complex sentence has one independent and one or more dependent clauses. And a compound complex sentence has two or more independents and one or more dependent clauses. All right, so for your DGP, you need to figure out what the purpose is and what the type is. And you ought to be able to do that at this stage of the game because you know how many clauses there are and whether or not those clauses are independent and dependent. I hope this video has helped you with day 3 of your DGP, finding and labeling independent and dependent clauses and finding sentence purpose and type.